the people we want to work with usually are entrepreneurs who have built a business, have a message they're trying to get out, thought leaders who have a message they're getting out in the world and want to take it to the next level, business professionals who have this core message they're trying to capture. From a budget perspective, we never prescribe before we diagnose, right? And so it really is a matter of what I would suggest is let's talk about it. Let's hear what you have to say and see what that message is. And if we think it could be a fit, you can apply to be part of that.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I am thrilled to have another heart-centered entrepreneur on the show, Bill Blankschaen. You are a multiple New York Times and USA Today bestseller. Congratulations. A lot of people who use the name bestseller are not New York Times and USA Today. So that is huge. And it's evident to me from your background in nonprofit and also working at an educational institution for a lot of your career before moving into building story builders. Wow, I work at an online school and I'm very passionate about education and servant leadership. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation.
Well, Annika, so great to be with you today. I love talking about all of it. So happy to have that discussion. And I'm just really passionate about helping other people get clear on their stories and telling them well, because I believe that when you do that, that's when breakthrough happens. That's when impact gets made. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, that is such a gift. I approach it from the PR marketing, branding, right? How do you create your brand? What does that mean? What is your future? What is your purpose? Vision, mission, values. I just had a conversation with somebody who does that in the world of finance as well, wants people to know who they are and what their purpose is so that they can build the finances around achieving their dreams. And you are helping people elevate, really understand who they are and elevate it.
Sure. Yeah. And it wasn't always like that. I mean, I can share a little bit of my story if that would be helpful. I mean, as you said, there was a time when I was running a private school that I helped found and led that for a dozen years, wore every hat you could think of. And it was rewarding work. As you know, I mean, when you're working with kids and with families, we were doing a lot of good. But the problem was I had always thought of myself as a writer, but I wasn't actually writing. I had thought of myself as a storyteller, but I wasn't telling stories. And so I eventually reached the place where I had to conclude, hey, I'm either going to do something with this, I don't know, this calling at the soul level that I felt I was wired to do, or let it go. Or I'd regret it forever, right? And so I chose to pursue it and let go of the school and leave that in someone else's hands and step out in this direction. And, we went a year with no income, 6 kids, no income, and dove into it. But I never worked harder in my life, like worked with publishers, learned the industry, created book proposals, shopped those, all this kind of really became a student of storytelling. And in that process, I actually had a book published in that process, but it was definitely one of, you wrestling with all these fears within of, is this going to make it? And am I going to be able to pull this off? Is it all that kind of stuff? And yet, having to kind of sit there in the midst of that and be creative. And so out of that came a book, and I learned I was actually really good at like writing books and began helping other people write books and began helping other people tell their stories. And out of that came story builders. And for the last 10 years, that's what we've been doing, helping, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, business professionals, all of it, tell their stories well, and organizations tell their stories well in a way that would really, truly make the world a better place.
Well, thinking about your move from the school that really had a lot of purpose and meaning and impacted many, many lives, but realizing that that's what we all do, right? We have that moment where we say, this is something that does help the world, but I have an even bigger purpose. There is something else I'm supposed to be doing on this earth.
Yeah.
That is such a pivotal moment. And the fact that you had to go through a year without this income where you were learning a new industry, but one you were really in tune with. I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And how were you received, knowing your background was in education and nonprofit, not in being an author,
That's right.
storytelling, right?
Well, I mean, the first part of that question, hear more about that. I think everybody has this kind of fantasy world of, boy, I want to follow my dream and go do that. And if I do that, everything will be great and wonderful, and flowers will be growing everywhere, and people will be celebrating and so forth. But they miss the fact that nobody wants to walk through that season of transition or going that. So a year with six kids, no income. I remember our Christmas that year with the kids was we didn't have any money to get them gifts, right? We were hoping to be able to feed them. That was our plan. So we got them each their favorite box of cereal and a 12 pack of their favorite soda, right? And those were their gifts. And when we look back now, 12, 13, 14 years later, whatever it is, our kids are like, that was our favorite Christmas memory of all. And to this day, we still give them a cereal box and a 12 pack of soda to remind us of sometimes you have to go through these seasons to pursue your dream. Right. And so it's okay. And that's a normal part of that process. So the second part of your question, how was I received? My background was in education. And so I've always thought of what I was doing as really teaching. And that's what makes me a good writer, made me a great teacher. Right. And so I'm really helping people to take ideas and teach them to others in that way. So it actually helped with developing intellectual property. We do a lot of that. We've done that with John Maxwell and his company for the last 10 years and creating all the workshops and trainings and all that kind of stuff, right? So, I talk about a story ecosystem that you have to get clear on what your message is, telling your brand story well, and then how you're going to multiply it, usually through the form of a book, and then how you're going to monetize it with your intellectual property, turning it into everything from courses and workshops and trainings to programs, all kinds of things, right? So yeah, I think it transitioned very naturally, but it also took a while, right? And it's you got to be able to put in the reps to get there.
Yeah. Luckily, a year is a painful time, but it's such a short amount of time, it seems.
It doesn't feel like it at the time. No. It does, especially when you don't know that, oh, it's going to be a year. All right, I can do that for a year. If you're like, I don't know what's coming next. But that's the reality for all of us, I think, and we tend to forget it. None of us know what's coming next, right? We tend to think we do, but then the unexpected happens, and we treat it like it's bizarre. But actually, the unexpected happens every day, and it's actually normal. And it's okay to be in that place.
Yeah. Well, I want to hear a little bit more about when you're making that transition, you were doing research, you were sending out, you wanted to get your book published, right? And you did. And then how in that year did you decide exactly what you wanted to do? Or did you decide exactly what you wanted to do? Or did that take a little bit more time?
It did take a little bit more time. For a good example, where we lived at the time in Ohio, unfortunately, there was a school shooting in our small town, American small town, white picket fence, just classic small town America. And the way the community came together afterwards and recovered from it, I thought made just a compelling story. It was an amazing story. And so I put together a proposal, shopped it to publishers, and had a publisher friend of mine contact me and say, hey, we're really interested in this. However, we have a question for you. Do you want to be talking about school shootings for the next 2 or 3 years? He said, because that's what you're going to have to do if you write this book. And whenever that happens, unfortunately, they're going to call you and want you to be on the news and give commentary on it. And I said, no, actually, I don't want to do that. And so what it helped me to realize was that you have to continue to hone that. All right, well, what do I want to talk about? What do I want to write about? What do I want to be heard about? And that, I think, going through that process is what has helped me work with other authors, whether it be big name authors or anywhere in between, to figure out, all right, you have ideas, but let's hone those down. And how do they fit within, again, that ecosystem that you're trying to build? Because what I've found, I call it the creativity conundrum, that the more creative ideas you have, the harder it is to get any of them done. Right? Yeah. And so helping people, all right, that's great. We got 45 great ideas. Let's distill it down. How does it fit within your plan? These 5 can form this message. Those other 40 can sit to the side for now. Let's focus, make our opportunities line up for us, if that makes sense.
Well, each of those ideas is like your child, right? So they're precious to the person who has them. So often I think we need that outside perspective
Yeah.
to go, well,
Yeah.
this is what you're doing. This is what your purpose and your mission really is. So these other things don't really make sense right now. Let's focus on the things that make sense for your business, your growth, and how you want to help others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important, like one of our core values is authenticity. And so we always stress if somebody comes to us and we're having those conversations, we're going to be authentic about what we think. And if that means that we're not the right fit for them, that's totally fine. We want to get out of their way, let them do what they're doing. But we'd rather have that and develop authentic relationships, which is really at the core of what we do, and know that their story is moving forward in a healthy way.
Yeah. What was it like to get your first client in the door and work with them? And did you have to also fine tune that process of helping them figure out what they were going to do with their thought leadership?
Absolutely. I mean, our first official client, we call them story partners. Our first official story partner was John Maxwell and Maxwell, what now is now Maxwell Leadership. Right from the start, we were working with them. And we've worked with all kinds of people everywhere and in between and so forth. So right from the start, we were creating at a pretty high level and doing those things. But the process was honed over time, right? So we created what we call our storytelling structure that guides all of our content creation. But that kind of emerged as we got in and got our hands dirty with words and messages and all that. And it kind of percolated on its own to something that we could then look back and identify, oh, there's a pattern here built on classic storytelling techniques and all those kind of things. And then identify it and then replicate it and apply it in a way that just serves as guidelines. I think that's important for people to realize that, the storytelling structure we use or whatever system that you might use to share a message, it really should serve as a guideline, right? It's not a strict, it has to look exactly like this. And because if you look at, for instance, if you look at 10 great books out there, you'll find they're all a little bit different, right? And yet they're all a little bit similar, right? And so again, it's that you don't want it too different. I call it the connection continuum. That you don't, if it's too different and so forth, people feel disconnected from it entirely. But if it's too similar, they feel like it's a duplicate. But if it's just right, it has a little bit of both, and it kind of draws people in as it feels familiar, but also fresh, if that makes sense, right? And so it's that combination of things, I think, that really pulls people together. But it has been honed over time, and it continues to be honed over time. We're constantly learning and growing as well.
Yeah, and that's what they say about every good business or every good idea is not necessarily the first one or the first person to market. It
Yeah,
is the iterations and the improvements that you make in the process as you go
sure.
along.
Absolutely, I think that is a good idea or a good understanding there that even your message, as you figure out for your organization, your brand, whatever that message is, it isn't static. It's dynamic. It's growing. It's morphing. When we do create a brand story with organizations, how do we want them to tell their story well and effectively to their audience and lay out all that stuff? We tell them this is a dynamic brand story. It's alive. And so it's going to adjust and change as you grow. You should revisit it and you should adjust it, but just not on a whim, right? Not because it feels good today. So I'll talk about it this way, but being able to repeat and be able to convey the same message that builds trust, but then at the same time, always learning, always growing, always adjusting to that process.
You've worked with some big names, as you mentioned, John Maxwell, Kevin Harrington, Lewis Howes, Michael Hyatt, Orion A.J. Vaden, Zig Ziglar, right? And many others. Is it the same process to work with people who might not be well known and, need your help to gain more visibility? Or
Yeah.
do you find one or the other are more difficult to work with? Or
Great question. Well, let me answer that with a story. A few years back, I had dinner a lunch meeting with someone in New York City who extremely well known. If I gave the name, everybody would know the last name. It's a very, very well known name. But as I sat with this person, they were sharing with me about their message and the struggles they were having getting it connected and the clarity and all that kind of stuff. What really came down to was they confided in me that, to be honest with you, I struggle with confidence about my message. And I wonder sometimes if I walk in the room and I share something, is it just my last name that people care about? Or do they actually care about what I'm saying? Is my message have value? And in that instant, I realized, here's someone that most people would think, well, of course they're confident. Of course they have all those things. And yet this person was struggling with exactly what every other person I work with has struggled with, right? And so realizing, all right, it's all the same struggles, it's all the same people, right? And I think actually what keeps some people from really maximizing their potential is thinking that idea that they tend to deify someone else and diminish themselves. And so a lot of it comes down to you have to actually believe that you have something of value, that you have something to give to the world. And I think that's really what has separated people as I've worked with them. But to the extent to which they believe, and then to the extent that they consistently follow on that message and execute on that message and repeat that message, all of that really becomes the key factors in how the impact they're going to have.
Yeah, that is such a great story to show that we really are all the same. We're just people. We're humans having our own struggles.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't matter. I've always thought of it this way. If you think of people who have more influence or name recognition or anything like that, again, I've had that thought. I've approached those conversations of they're people. And often, well, two thoughts on this. I've said you can either be a friend or a fan. Fan is someone who's like, oh, can I get your autograph? Can I get a selfie? Can I get whatever? And if you do that, then people are like, okay, that's fine. I know what category you're in. I put you there. Or you can be, I don't want any of that stuff. I just actually want to serve you. I actually want to be a help to you. And again, if that means that I get out of your way is the best way to serve you, then I'll get out of your way and serve you in that way. Right. So first of all, I think that's the thing to understand. And then secondly, you just to understand that they're high trust relationships. Right. And so you have to respect every relationship like that and treat it as a just trust that is kind of, there's a sacredness to it, and let them know that they can just be themselves, because they get people all the time are asking them for things and trying to get favors and this and that. And, I've always approached it as, hey, I just want to be a friend. How can I help you? How can I pray for you? How can I serve you? Whatever. What does that look like? And just trust that if we do that, if we treat everybody like that good things will come.
Yeah, wonderful. Is the point of entry usually somebody coming to you saying, I have a book inside me, but I don't feel confident as a writer, I don't have time?
Yeah.
Or is it a mix? Because you also, as you mentioned, do a lot of brand work and other aspects, courses.
Yep. Yeah, no, great question. I think usually people come to us with that sense of, I've always wanted to write a book, or I've been thinking about writing a book. That's a clear felt need. And often as going through the book process, we're dealing with a lot of the brand story questions anyways. Like we have 6 questions we go through at the outset of any book project. I don't care who we're working with. We're asking these core questions to really lay a strong foundation. And I can talk about those if you want to, but we go through those questions, and often they help craft a brand story even as we work on the book. So sometimes individuals come to us and they say, hey, I'm not ready for a book, but I want to get my message clear. We help them with the brand story. Other times they're coming in, they have a book, and they're like, oh yeah, I really need to get clear on my message. And how do I monetize this into something else, something beyond this? And we're just having a conversation with a gentleman now about helping with his book and getting it published and out in the world. And how do we create other materials of training experiences and so forth that can be used in organizations and all those kind of fun things. So yes, it often starts with the book, but then when they get the vision of there's a bigger ecosystem at work here that I can build and grow, then it expands.
And I find that really interesting, because I think sometimes people want to start somewhere, but they don't realize that maybe their path is going to lead them to something else first. So it's really beautiful. But I'd love to hear about your construct and the questions that you ask people. And is this before they even come into your ecosystem? Is this after you've decided, yes, I'll work with this client?
These are the questions we use at the start of a book, especially. So these are book starter questions, but they can apply to help people figure out whatever their core message is, right? So maybe someone's like, hey, I don't want a book. I'm a speaker. I only want to speak on stage. I don't want to do a book, although having a book is terrific for speakers and vice versa. It would help get clarity on that message, that content. So first question we ask, we call it the story focus question. And that is, if someone read your book, listened to your speech, whatever, however the message is delivered, someone read your book and they forgot 99% of what they just read, and they only remembered one thing, what would you want that one thing to be? Like, what would you really like, man, if you lost everything else, don't miss this. And what that question does is it really helps people focus on what really matters to me. What's kind of my why behind this book? What's the core of that message that I want to share? That if you forget everything else but remember this, that's a win, right? And so that's that story focus question that kind of sets the tone for the whole message and project. The second one, I call it the needle mover question, and that is, when you write this book, how do you expect this to move the needle in the world? How do you expect, what kind of impact are you hoping this book will have? That helps to kind of visualize the end that they have in mind. What's the impact that I want to have? And all right, based on that, how are we going to create something with this message that can move that needle to that place? The third question is a story strategy question. And that is, basically, what are you trying to build here? Well, how does this book fit in with your bigger plans? Because there have been many people that have come to me and said, "Hey, I want to write a book," and our team has been like, "That's great. Tell me how this fits into what you're already doing or trying to build." And many times they'll say, "I'm not really sure," and we'll say, "Well, we should figure that out before we get too far down this road." To do that, right? So always taking a step back, not rushing to, of course you should write a book, or of course you should, but is this really the right path that you want to be on, right? So um, that's the story strategy question. Another question that we use in this process, we call it the coffee shop question. And that is, if you were to sit down with me, let's say you're an author, Annika, or you're an aspiring author, you want to write a book, and we would say, hey, if you were to sit down with me for coffee to help solve the problem that you're trying to solve, what steps would you take me through to do that? How would you help me go from A to B to C to, how would you help me solve that problem in that kind of conversation? And it really kind of a disarming psychologically question, a really casual question of, well, how would I do it? And then they realize, I've actually already done that many times. I've had those conversations and I've walked people through this, because some people come to us with a lot of clarity. They've already got their IP really framed out a lot. Other people, they haven't really formulated it at all. It's just raw content. But what that really is it's the core of their intellectual property, right? It's that core process, method, cycle, whatever the case may be. And we have all kinds of follow-up questions we take people through to figure that out. But that really becomes that intellectual property that's uniquely theirs. Like for us, our storytelling structure is how we walk people through the content, or our story ecosystem, how we build that out, and all those kind of ways. And then one of the other questions we ask is that story strategy, or I'm sorry, the story structure question. How are you going to structure your book or your message? And we have a whole process we go through in order to do that. But anyways, those questions, those are the kind of questions we love to ask that really unpack that. And we have I have a book coming out in October called Your Story Advantage that kind of walks people through the whole ecosystem and pulls back the curtain, shows this is how we do what we do. That would give them a little bit more in depth on all those things.
Well, in the midst of creating this company and working with so many people to impact their lives, their businesses, and those of many others because of what they're doing and putting out into the world, you also started a podcast. So what was the decision to start the podcast, and what has that brought to you and your life and your business?
Well, we have our Story Builders podcast, which is actually more of our team-driven podcast. I'm actually, and that was more designed to connect with people who have stories to tell and kind of draw that out and share that. I'm actually launching my own podcast, Your Story Advantage, aligned with the book, coming into this fall, where because it really is about my passion for connecting with people, learning their stories. Because this is what I do whenever I meet people. I'm always asking them questions. And I mean, if we were here, I'd be asking you questions and asking you questions about your answers and going deeper.
You're going to be a fantastic host.
Yeah. Yeah, like I want to know the story behind the story, right? I want to know what really makes you tick, what really drives this. Because I want people to be able to learn from those stories. I think our stories are perhaps one of our most precious possessions that we have as people. And they're partly because we have so much control over them and we can uniquely shape them in a powerful way. And no one has the same story. even if they have similar circumstances in some way, in the history of the world, no one has lived exactly as you have lived and exactly the experiences you've had and exactly the perspective you have and the person, there's just one you. And so you can say there's nothing new under the sun, and that's true, except you, right? You're new. So it all changes. So I think helping people understand that value and then what can they do with that? What kind of impact can they make as a result of that when they tell those stories well, that opens up so many other doors. I'm working with a gentleman here. I'm in the Orlando area, Florida. I'm working with a gentleman here who has a organization that helps other nonprofits do what they do better. And so I'm working with him to really improve what he does and improve what they do so that that can be a kind of a force multiplier for other people, right? To do better at what they do. So that's what really drives me is how can we tell stories that become catalysts for growth for other people, for even for exponential growth in many ways.
Well, and the idea of getting your story out and inspiring people and teaching them something to make their lives better is so important. But then we have the flip side of people who do want to write something to also be a bestseller on the New York Times or USA Today, or, be published by a big publisher, not do a hybrid or an independent deal, or just become an Amazon bestseller, as many of us are, right? There's different levels. So do you also start with that in mind of where does the person want to take the book? What will it take to get them there?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of people that come to us maybe have this, I want to be New York Times or USA, whatever bestseller list. And again, we go back to that story strategy. How does that fit into what you're trying to build? Because what we generally find is a lot of people are like, you know what, I want to have an impact. I want to grow a business. We have one gentleman we've worked with now. We've developed 2 books with him. We started with training, then books, and now we're now working on a 3rd book. We've done workshops, all that kind of stuff. He's moved 250,000 copies of one of the books. And it's been a driver of his business success, and he's had a tremendous success. It's not on any list. It didn't make did not a bestseller list or anything, but it's got the results that he wanted. Right? That's what he wanted, and that's what he got. Right. And so the lists can be complicated. They can be misleading. They can be kind of red herrings at times, that people chase that shiny object and take their eye off what they're trying to build. Right. And so it's important to understand. It's important to understand what it could take to get there. Right. It just doesn't happen accidentally. It takes a lot of work to get there. And we can talk about the lists and how they're made up and all that kind of stuff. But the New York Times list especially is a very finicky list in terms of making it.
Wow. Well, to that point, I do want to hear a little bit about building your team, which is, I know, going off on a little bit of a different tact, but making sure that you are building your team with the same intentionality that you're bringing to this process. Was it hard to find the right people? Because, you hear about writing books, using people who will help, and how long that process can be, which I'd love to unpack a little bit as well. And then, of course, we live in this world where people are all saying, oh, I can just write a book with AI and it'll be super quick and it can have great results. And I think that misses the authenticity, the transparency, and some of the storytelling that you get from the human experience of actually taking that time and attention.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the topic of AI, we can talk about that also. In fact, I will. But let me answer the first part first. I think the first part of your question was about our team. Like, how have we developed our team, right? And I think the answer is, for us, the number one key of who we are as a company has been culture. Culture, driven by our values. Our values are decision-making filters. It's how we do everything. And so we're always making sure that we have the right people on the bus, to use Jim Collins's language, right? Get the right people who align with our culture, because our culture is very relationship oriented. It's very creativity oriented, and it's very excellence oriented. Creativity, relationships, excellence. Put those 3 things together. That would be what, Gino Wickman calls your 3 uniques, is kind of what separates us in a powerful way. So that culture has always been there. And then what that does is it produces a team. I literally just got off a meeting a few minutes ago with our team, as we've been trying to roll out more operating system things and so forth. And the reason the meeting went well is because we were able to really be authentic about, hey, what's working, what's not working, where can we grow, where can we improve? So I would say culture has absolutely been the key, and that culture focus has been the key. On the AI front, more and more people are saying those kind of things of I'll just use AI to write my book and all that kind of stuff. First of all, AI can be a useful tool when you're writing a book if you use it wisely and smartly. It can be a time saver, it can be a thought starter, it can be all kind. You can use it to sort content that's existing for you as an author. So it can be again kind of shaving off time, accelerating the process. What people need to be very careful about, though, is that if they're using AI to write a book in an open source model, like that's open to the internet, that's open to other people's content, they do not own that content. That's not theirs. Can't copyright it because they're pulling in other people's stuff. And so the whole legal situation out there is like the Wild West at the moment. There are people who are building what they think are businesses around intellectual property that isn't really theirs, and it's going to come back and bite them in a big way. And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't take that much to actually be creative about things. And if somebody's like, hey, that's not my thing, there's people like us they can partner with to do incredible things, right? Because even people who are really creative come to us and say, hey, this is really good. Can you make it great? Or make it better, right? And that's what we do. We elevate that message. But so AI can be a helpful tool, but it can also be a distraction. It can also be just a debilitating move if you're not doing it wisely and smartly in that process.
Yeah. I can see how that definitely would happen. I know that there have been books that people have put out on Amazon, for instance, that were just full of radical errors and lack of original thought, to your point. Because I know that's a lot of going through the courts right now in terms of the written word, but also images, videos, other things that we create because they're based on other people's inputs.
Yeah, all of that. All of that. Yeah, and AI can be tempting because it feels like a shortcut there. And again, it can shortcut a lot of different stuff. And I think we're just scratching the surface of those shortcuts, of those time savers that are going to be developed. I mean, we're seeing radical changes and shifting. But at the end of the day, storytelling is, even you can develop some formulaic ways, like we're going to be developing our own AI tool that we use internally with our storytelling structure and all that kind of stuff. Again, it's just to streamline the process. But what the creativity is going to come of how do we make connections that AI can't make and never can make because AI can only do what has been done and follow that pattern, where we're trying to add fresh insights, fresh perspectives, and understand a lot of the nuances behind a message that simply can't be imitated.
Mm. How long is the process to write a good, strong book?
Our typical process, let's call it our story creation process, that we go through from idea to publication. We typically say it's a 9 to 10 month process that we go through, depending on where the calendar falls. Like you don't want a book coming out at Christmas time, getting lost in the rush, but something like that. But we work with people to create books for other publishers. Like we just write the manuscripts and hand it off to them. We do the publishing, or we can do it where we're doing the publishing, all that. And I like to say, fastest book I ever wrote was, I laid a lot of the groundwork and interviews and all that kind of stuff. And then in a space of about 18 days, I wrote like a 75,000 word book. That was working with a different publisher and all that kind of stuff. That's not the norm. I don't recommend that approach. But typically you can figure, all things being equal, like a 6-month process to create a really good manuscript would be solid. But again, it depends on people's schedules as well. And I would say the big thing is to develop the rest of the plan, right? Don't just be so focused on, I'm going to write a great book, but what am I going to do with it? How am I going to get the word out about it? How am I going to have a strategy behind this so that you don't end up with a book that nobody ever reads, right? So first to have a best-selling book, first thing you have to do, it has to be a really great book. That's number one. But the second thing is you have to have a strategy for helping to get the word out about it, even if it's not big splash. I'm going to try for New York Times. Again, a very fickle list. I literally just heard from somebody the other day, a book that I worked on that we wrote, and the book did exceptionally well. All the sales numbers said it should have made the New York Times list, and it did not. It should have, based on the numbers, and it made the USA Today top 10, it made all that kind of stuff, but it didn't make the Times list because the Times list is an editorial list, right? So it's not just numbers. They want to see numbers, but then the people in the room will decide who gets in and who doesn't, who makes a list, who doesn't. And I mean, I've seen books sell more than 100,000 copies in their first week and not make the list. And at the same time, other books under 5,000, 10,000 copies, they did make the list, right? Because it isn't just a numbers list. It's a judgment call list. And so that's why I tell people, if you're going to stake everything on that, know that you could do everything right and still not make it. And it is what it is. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing that because I think, I've heard a little bit about some of the things. It depends on specific store sales or this or that, but understanding that's also, it is editorial. So it's not just based on how many copies you sell. That's, I think, something really important for people to think about when they're thinking about the goals that they have with writing a book.
yeah. USA Today list is more numbers driven by far. There's still an editorial element in it though, because it all comes down to that at the end, but it's not nearly as much. So USA Today is far more, but again, you do have to have sales spread out across things. Like you just can't go out and, buy 10,000 copies yourself and get an instant bestseller. It used to be that way years ago before the people figured out, wait a second, this isn't really reflective of the impact of the book.
And what is the perfect persona of somebody coming in? Because I know this can also it's a long process. It can be exhausting, but also the financial component.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have to be exhausting. And I think that's one of the things that makes us different is that when people work with us, it's not exhausting. It doesn't feel like a big lift. We form friendships through it. They enjoy the process. It's important for us that happens, that they really enjoy the process and they come out of it thinking, wow, I can't wait to do that again. This is a fun process. So it doesn't have to be exhaustive. But the people we want to work with usually are entrepreneurs who have built a business, have a message they're trying to get out, thought leaders who have a message they're getting out in the world and want to take it to the next level, business professionals who have this core message they're trying to capture. From a budget perspective, we never prescribe before we diagnose, right? And so it really is a matter of what I would suggest is let's talk about it. Let's hear what you have to say and see what that message is. And if we think it could be a fit, you can apply to be part of that. So, we offer a totally free call to do that. We have a meeting with someone and walk through, let's hear your idea. Let's give you feedback on it. We want it to be a value added call for someone to take that. But then as you get that, we can explain to you, hey, here's the options. Here's what that can look like. Do you want to write it yourself or do you want us to coach you? Do you want us to do the writing along with you or for you? Do we want to have something around that marketing side and a plan behind that? Or do you just want to dip your toe in the water and say, hey, what would it take to create a foundation for this book? What could this book look like? Let's bring this book to life. Let's bring my book blueprint, if you will. And we do those all the time let's figure out what that could look like. And then someone's really empowered to go from there, whatever direction they would want to go.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And you did mention again that you can have a marketing package. And I do think that's something that people forget about. I know I've talked to some people who've written a book and then they want to have a strategy for PR. And I'm like, wow, you should have started that before you even started writing, because you want to start getting your message out even before you've written the book or before it's published.
Yeah, definitely before it's published. Absolutely. But I would say also people don't let that intimidate them into not getting their message out. Right. And I know your podcast is all about amplifying your brand and marketing. So I'm sure your audience is very knowledgeable in a lot of those things. Probably some people in agencies, probably some people in the marketing, but they're like, oh yeah, I know how to do all that. Books are a little unique, by the way, in terms of how they approach. But even with that in mind, you often need someone who has an outsider's perspective to help you align that, put that in motion. And I just don't want people to be intimidated by that thought of, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to write a book. I don't know any of this. Ignorance is not a problem. There are people who can help you overcome that challenge and create a really compelling book.
Fantastic. You told us about a success story of somebody who moved a lot of books, wasn't on the bestseller list, but was able to reach their exact goals for their business. Do you have one or two other stories that you'd like to share with us that were some of your favorite projects?
Some of the projects are, I'll use a well-known name and then maybe a lesser known name at the moment. Well-known name, Lewis Howes, it's been privileged to partner with him on multiple books now. And, that is a great case of when we first start working on a book, it's more a big idea in a conversation. And then we distill it down to that main message, that central story focused question. If they remember nothing else, what is it? then we ideate around it. And what I really love to do is we add value to all the content and flesh it all out, but then create tools and frameworks and IP elements that can be included in it that really help bring it to life in powerful ways. And his last book, Make Money Easy, just came out in March. Great book, just a phenomenal book. I know I'm biased, but it just came out a really good book. And I think it's one of his best ever. So on that side of things, to go from idea to that, yeah, I think of some other authors we've worked with. Rebecca Young, actually, she's a VP of technology and innovation at FedEx, right? So as a business professional, has a lot on her plate right now, but she has had this over her career, has had these things that she keeps talking about. And people keep saying, oh, you should write a book. And so she did. She worked with us to write this book. Chinese American woman who grew up here in the US, parents immigrated here, and it just built an incredible career on that. And so she wrote a book called What Rules, right? Essentially challenging all those boxes that everybody tries to put you in. But hers is really about positioning for what's coming next for her career path, and potentially as her future grows, what else could I build off of that? What else could I expand and be prepared for that? Similar to Chris Winton was another, he was at FedEx. He's now, I think, head of HR at Comcast, if I'm not mistaken. He wrote a great book a few years back, and that book was actually the impetus that elevated his career, because the book came on Fred Smith's desk at FedEx, and he was like, hey, I want this guy in more of our leadership team conversation, right? So just a couple examples there. And we work with multiple entrepreneurs and other thought leaders and all that kind of stuff to really bring that stuff to life. So yeah, plenty of stories to talk about impact.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more of them on your podcasts and examples in your upcoming book. Once they come out in the fall, we will update the show notes to include that information. For now, we'll lead people to your website.
Yeah, I would say, if people are like, hey, I want to have a conversation about my idea, no pressure or anything like that, but they can go to mystorybuilders.com/story. So mystorybuilders.com/story. Just schedule a call. We will add value to you. I guarantee it. It will be a helpful call. And I would say, Annika, for your guests, if they just mentioned that they heard about it on Your Brand Amplified, we will give them a book starter tool that we have that walks them through those questions and other stuff at a deeper level that they can really apply to do those things. And I'm just thinking about this. If somebody's like, hey, I'm still trying to figure out my life direction and my story direction, maybe they heard my story and they're like, oh, I'm thinking about, we'll also give them a free bonus training. It's like a 90-minute session that I gave about, how to actually live a story worth telling, and how do you go about that? And if it would be of help to them, they just have to mention, hey, I heard about it on this podcast, and when they book their call, and we will get it in their hands.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your generosity. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Bill, and I am truly looking forward to hearing more stories and more of the ways that you've made impact with different people and helped them expand their lives and their passions and their impact.
Well, I so appreciate you having me on. If we had time, I would turn the microphone around and ask you lots of questions about your story, but maybe another day on my podcast, we can have you on.
I'd love to be on. I always like to ask my guests, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, verse, poem, family motto, some words that continue to inspire you?
I would have to come back to it. I think it is a verse. It is a verse, but it's this idea of that, the importance of living by faith. Like, you have to live by, and how I define faith is doing what you believe to be true, often in spite of what you see, sense, or feel. Okay, so faith is doing and action. And I would say that, faith isn't faith until it's tested, has been a mantra of mine. And so, we have to go by what we believe to be true, but the fact is we don't really know what we believe to be true until it gets tested, until things get tough, until you go through that season of no income and 6 kids, or until you go through that hard time in a marriage or relationship or whatever the case may be, or the business. Again, we tend to think those things are abnormal, but they're actually part of life. I was just talking to my wife about this morning, actually, about those kind of circumstances that were like, well, this is a weird time or something. Like, no, actually, this is a normal time. So I would say that kind of idea that you have to step out before you know how it's all going to turn out. So,
Yeah. Fantastic words for, this time that we're living in, but really any time. So thank you for that.
oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. And I look forward to having continued conversations with you, getting your book, listening to your podcast, and being a guest on yours in the future. So thank you again, Bill. And thank you to everybody who's watching this episode or listening to it on your favorite platform. We really appreciate you being here. I will also link to your team's podcast in the show notes if that's okay. I'd love to make sure I'm sharing these tools that can be so valuable to people who are listening. And with that, everybody, I hope that you're having a beautiful day. And I'll be back again with another amazing guest very shortly to share their story, their journey, and some helpful advice to help you make your life a little bit better every single day. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbandamplified.com.